I thought it might be best to begin this talk by coming clean to you all and admitting the fact that as someone who is Wicklow born and bred, I do find it very hard to be objective when it comes to the subject of discussing Wicklow's remarkable gardens. This fact was confirmed to me a couple of years ago when Discover Ireland, the official website of Tourism Ireland, asked me if I'd mind writing a piece on Irish gardens for them, a suggestion to which I readily agreed. They then laid down two very important conditions, which suddenly made my job an awful lot more difficult. The first was that the piece had to be short, no longer than about 500 words. And the second was that rather than being a piece on Irish gardens in general, it had to be a piece on what I personally considered to be Ireland's must-see gardens. So my heart sank as all of a sudden I was faced with this quandary as to which gardens to include, which to leave out, and where to begin. In the end, I sat down and reluctantly made out a shortlist, which took me a very long time. And when I'd finished, I sent it off, the finished article, to them. And a couple of days later, I got a nice email back thanking me for my efforts. But the people at Discover Ireland had just one query for me, and it was this. Did I realise that roughly a third of the gardens on my must-see shortlist were situated in County Wicklow? In fact, I hadn't, but I do think it's a measure of what a truly extraordinary County Wicklow is when it comes to the rich variety of exceptional and even sometimes world-class gardens that are contained within its boundaries. Better still for any visitor to Wicklow is the fact that just outside those boundaries, on the edges of County Dublin as well as the rural counties of Wexford, Carlow and Kildare, are a wealth of other outstanding gardens, which is why it's such a wonderful idea that they have been included in this year's Wicklow Gardens Festival. All in all, there are 33 gardens taking place in the trail this year, which I should also point out is the longest established trail of its kind in this country, now being in its 23rd year. That list of 33 gardens includes many magnificent historic gardens, such as the centuries-old Kilruddery in East Wicklow, also Ireland's oldest surviving gardens, and which have been in the private ownership of the Brabazons, Earls of Meath, ever since they were first laid out in the 1600s. It also includes Avondale, whose 18th century gardens were created by Samuel Hayes, the remarkable Irish MP, barrister, amateur architect, draftsman, and passionate planter of trees, and the man who wrote the very first ever book on Irish forestry. It includes the wonderfully imposing, majestically formal gardens of Powerscourt, with their fountains, their lakes, and their gilded statuary. And then there's the magical, OPW-managed Altamont near Tullow in County Carlow, a garden that will be forever associated, in my mind at least, with its late owner, Corona North, and whose glorious herbaceous borders, lake, ancient woodland walks, and its vistas across the River Slaney have enthralled generations of garden visitors, myself included. Also featuring this year's trail are some truly remarkable romantic Robinsonian gardens. Mount Usher, which the well-known British gardener, author and broadcaster Monty Don recently nominated as his favourite Irish garden of all. Kilmacurra, where the distinguished horticulturalist and author Seamus O'Brien is creating an organically managed botanic gardens divided into different phytogeographical zones. And then there's some charmingly atmospheric and graceful old country house gardens, such as those of Dower House in Rossana, as owned by the art critic and author Patricia Butler, the gardens of Birdtown House in Athy in County Kildare, which is home to one of the country's best known and most admired botanical illustrators, Wendy Walsh, and of course the gardens belonging to this very hotel. Hunter's wonderful country gardens have long been a much-loved refuge from the busyness of modern life. And that's not all, for this exceptional garden trail also features magnificently restored wall gardens, tranquil water gardens, many joyfully coloured, exquisitely planted cottage-style gardens, inspiring, educational and thought-provoking gardens, and even a garden, St. Fiacre's Garden, that commemorates very fittingly the patron saint of gardeners. Last but certainly not least are the excitingly contemporary plants persons gardens in the trail, many of which have been created by the country's most talented garden designers and nursery people. These include the many different show gardens of the National Garden Exhibition Centre in Kilquaid, Bay Garden in County Wexford, the gardens of the family-run Chelsea Gold Medal winning garden in Kilmurray Nursery, and the brilliant individual gardens of sibling horticulturists June and Jimmy Blake near Blessington. As to the reasons why one might and should visit at least some of these gardens this summer, they are many. The very best gardens inform, inspire, intrigue, restore and delight us. sometimes for the rest of our lives. Perhaps I shouldn't mention it, but I still remember the giddy childhood joy of bouncing up and down on one of the suspension bridges that straddled the River Bartree in Mount Usher Gardens, just as I remember the many hours I spent as a young gardener with both Marianne Heron and later Shirley Lanigan's garden guides in my bag, crisscrossing the county's bumpy laneways in search of its loveliest gardens, and meeting many interesting plants people along the way. Which brings me to my final point, that just as these 33 gardens have much to teach us, so do every one of the people who tend to them, whether professionally trained or self-taught. And so for me, this festival is as much a celebration of the many skilled, talented and passionate gardeners living and working in Wicklow today and in the surrounding counties, as it is a celebration of the gardens themselves. For without these exceptional gardeners and the exceptional gardeners that preceded them, there would be no exceptional gardens. As to the question of how a good gardener might one day, perhaps, become an exceptional gardener, I would suggest that there's no better place to start than by visiting some of the gardens included in this year's Wicklow Gardens Festival. Thank you very much.